Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and welcome to the next lesson in our modern OpenGL series. In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at something known as a uniform variable. A uniform is essentially just a global variable on a shader. So it's a global variable available in all of our graphics pipeline. We'll go ahead and revisit that, and I'll go ahead and draw it out so it makes a little bit more sense in a moment. But what I want to go ahead and do is do a quick review of what we've done so far, and then we're going to talk about this idea of a uniform, what it is, and what it allows us to do in our graphics program. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at this idea one more time and review where we're at. Now, we've talked about vertex buffer objects previously, and that was essentially a way for us to pack a bunch of information here, like X, Y, and Z information, or R, G, and B, and then the next set of X, Y, and Z, etc., etc., and then be able to appropriately retrieve the vertices and the colors for these individual vertices. Now, I'm just sort of highlighting here the first 6 of these values here, these first 6 floats, which we sort of divided up into 2 chunks, the colors and then the red, green, and blue values. So in our vertex buffer object here that we sent in previously in order to render this rectangle, we had various locations where we could find this data. And in fact, let's just go ahead and look at the shader here. And here's our code set up thus far. And let's just go ahead and look at what that was in our shader folder in the vertex shader. And again, this was the location 0, or the first set of data that we sent in. And then location number 1 was our colors here. And then as we repeat this again for the next vertex in our shader. So again, this is for vertex 1 here. I'm highlighting vertex 1, and this is our second vertex. And I'm actually just going to label these as we count in computer science, vertex 0 and vertex 1. Okay. Now the whole point of this again is this is how we're able to send in information. And in our shaders, in our graphics pipeline, we had specific locations of these values. Now, what if I have information that I want to send in that's not vertex information? Like maybe I just want to send in a value in here to offset the position by some value. And that's what we're actually going to do in this lesson. So in order to do this, we need to learn about something known as a uniform variable. So uniform variable. And what a uniform is a global variable on the GPU. Okay. And it's shared, I'll write some of the attributes here. It's shared in our vertex shader and the fragment shader. And if we have other shaders like our geometry shader, etc., etc., etc. And it's a value that's const. That means we can't change it in the vertex shader and the fragment shader. Okay. So the idea is that we're passing, when we want to update this value, we pass value from our CPU to our GPU. Okay, and that's the idea. And I've run out of room here, so let's go ahead and take a look at what this actually is and how we use a uniform variable. All right, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is get rid of my whiteboard for a moment, and let's just go ahead and look at our code here. Now, if I want a uniform variable in my vertex shader or my fragment shader, so let's make sure that we open up our other fragment shader here so that we have both of them available, then I just need to create a uniform somewhere. Now, again, it's going to be shared here, so we need to create it in both of our files here. So let's just go ahead in our vertex shader. So that's down here at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and just create a uniform variable. It's going to have a type float, and I'm just going to call it offset. Now, offset's a reserved name, so we need to do something with it, and so change the name. But stylistically, for my uniform variables, I do like to put U in front of them just so I know. So I'm just going to call it U offset, or some folks might do U underscore offset. Now the name's actually very important, so I want to go ahead and keep track of this. But this is a uniform variable. Okay. Now uniform variables, we don't initialize on the GPU. Sometimes you can, depending on your system, but in general, we don't initialize them, because again, the point of a uniform variable is we're going to pass the value from our CPU onto our GPU. Sort of like what we did with our vertex buffer object when we did GL buffer data and sent information into this big buffer onto our GPU. The difference with our uniforms is that we're going to be doing this constantly to update the actual values. Okay. Now, stylistically, something folks also do is they'll copy this and place it in both shaders. You can do this, but you don't have to. And we can go around and play with this a little bit if we want to. Okay. But I'll go ahead and for this lesson, go ahead and copy this here. Now, what am I going to want to do with offset here? Well, for the purpose of this example, I'm just going to work in the vertex shader. So again, let's get rid of our fragment shader just so we don't have that distraction. And I'm just going to use it to offset the Y positions here. So I'm just going to do plus U offset, and I'll go ahead and compile. And let's go ahead and just compile this program. So again, from our previous lesson, if you didn't see how we did this, recall that we're also adding in our GLM mathematics library. That's the compilation line. So let's go ahead and just hit enter, make sure that everything's compiling, run our program, and I'll go ahead and bring in our window here, and nothing's changed here. Okay, so it looks like this U offset was luckily initialized to 0. You can't count on that always, but that's what we've got here. So let's actually see how would we update this offset value. Well, in order to do that, what I'm going to need to do is open up our C++ code here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. And I'm just going to go ahead and make this window a little bit bigger so we can see a little bit more. And scrolling through the code here, what I want to do for my uniform is I need to create some value on my CPU code, again, my C++ code, for this uniform. Okay, so let's go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. And in fact, let me just go ahead and get rid of the shader here just so you can see the code a little bit better. And this is a good recap of what we've done here. Okay, so again, we're just following our graphics pipeline where we initialize OpenGL, we set up our vertex specification, which is just saying, hey, what's our geometry? Well, it's positions and colors. And then we want to go ahead and set up our graphics pipeline that is compiling our vertex shader and our fragment shader. Now our vertex shader and fragment shader have one uniform variable, so we can communicate with it. And then we have our main loop. And so since I want to be updating this uniform variable, let's go ahead into our main loop here. And we have some options here for input, pre-draw, and draw, where we can start to affect things. So I'm going to go ahead into our input here. And I've gone ahead and updated some code here for SDL. And I have a video of this on my SDL playlist. So make sure you subscribe and otherwise check out that playlist if you want to understand how this is doing. But basically just looking at our keyboard here, I'll even bring in the SDL help page if it's useful for you using SDL Keyboard state. And then you can look up any scan codes if you want and just use this table here. But basically I'm just checking for the up key and the down key. Okay, so with that, I want to go ahead and just update some variable here. Now let's go ahead and go to the top of our code and let's go ahead and do this. And let's create a uniform variable here. And that's going to represent our offset here. Okay. And again, you know, folks might criticize me for globals, but we're just learning here. We can organize this in some other manner. And at some point in this series, we will have abstraction. But what I want to go ahead and do is just create a float. I'm going to call it U offset. And I'm going to go ahead and initialize this to 0. And this is a global variable. So I'll do G underscore for it. Okay, so it's sort of matching what we did previously. Okay. So let's go ahead back to our code here, and let's just go ahead and say G U offset plus equal 0.01 here. And if I hit the down key, let's just go ahead and say minus equal 0.01 here. Okay, so I'm just changing this value here. And actually, every time that we update, let's go ahead and just print off G underscore U offset, just so that we can go ahead and see what happens here and sort of keep track of what our variable is doing. And we'll go ahead and output there. Okay, so let's just go ahead and test this much out here. So I'll compile here. Whoops, looks like I added an extra I here. Let me get rid of that here. So always good to work on making one small update at a time and then updating our program. And here's our program here. And I'm hitting the up key and the down key. And it looks like it's updating, although I got rid of the minus here. So it's more like a reset. Let's do that there. All right, there we are. There's a few wrong key presses. And now we should be able to, if I bring in my window here on my other screen, just hit up and down, and we can see the values updating. Perfect. Okay, so now we've got something actually interactive in our graphics application. But how do I send that value here so that it updates what's on the CPU code? Because again, that's the goal of our uniform. Okay, so in order to do this, what I'm going to go ahead and do here is let's go ahead and see what we're doing in pre-draw here. So in our pre-draw routine, this is where we're setting up what's going to happen and which shader to use here. Okay, so this again is selecting my graphics pipeline here. It's saying, hey, use this vertex shader and fragment shader that's been compiled together to form this graphics pipeline. Okay, so we've got that much here. But now I actually want to, again, use some uniform variable or access something in that pipeline. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring you to docs.gl, one of our other helpful pages here. And I'm just going to search glUniform here, because this is what we're going to be working with. And there's different types and different ways we can work with glUniform, but let's go ahead and look at the version 4. And basically what these sets or this family of functions does is it says, hey, for a glUniform, we can specify the value of a uniform variable for the current program object. Okay, what's our current program object? That's this here, ggraphics pipeline shader program. That's the program object we're using. That's our graphics pipeline. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do here then to set this value is set a particular location and a floating point value. Okay, why a floating point value? Well, that's what U offset was. But we're not quite done here because we don't know where this location's coming from. So we need another function here that's going to be useful for us. And it's going to be glGetUniformLocation. Okay, and I'll go ahead to the web page here so we can see. It says returns the location of a uniform variable. Okay, so we have to know where in memory we're actually modifying some uniform variable. I know this is a little bit weird, but it sort of makes sense if we try to draw this out. So let me give you a picture and then we'll use these functions here. So basically what I have here, and I'm going to go ahead and give us more room here, is in my graphics pipeline, I have my vertex, and let me go ahead and draw this out here, my vertex shader. I have my fragment shader, and let's go ahead and put boxes here. And essentially, you know, for the purpose of our pipeline, right, we have this arrow that I'm going to draw here. And let's actually open up our vertex shader here, and then we'll revisit our code. So shaders, I'll open up the fragment shader first, and then let's split this window. Okay, so we got the vertex shader on the top here. Okay, I've got my things that are coming into the shader, right? That's my vertex buffer object, which I'll just draw here, VBO. Okay, that's got X, Y, Z, RGB, X, Y, Z, RGB, etc., etc. Okay, and that's the stuff that's being passed into our vertex shader here. Okay, and again, notice there's location 0 here. So that's where the first set of data is coming in for our vertex. We've got location 1, which is our G and B. That's the next thing coming in. And then we might have another location for this offset here. But we're actually just going to query that because I might have multiple of these offsets. And then I'll show you that we can sort of explicitly look this up. And I hope this makes a little bit of sense to you that in our GPU program, our vertex shader here, we're just allocating some memory here. Now we're grabbing it from the GPU, or rather, you know, specifically saying, hey, take this in, please, from our, you know, vertex buffer layout. And then, hey, take this, you know, uniform variable or create this, reserve this space here. And then we're going to send some information from our CPU here. Okay. So that's our vertex buffer object, or sort of our attributes, okay, that we're sending in, that are the attributes of a vertex, things like position and color. Okay, but then we've also got our uniforms. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw another box here, and I'll label it uniforms. And that's this thing here, U offset, that I've labeled here, or U underscore offset. Let me be specific. And again, that's shared in our vertex shader and our fragment shader, okay? Vertex shader and fragment shader has access to this offset here, okay? So that's really important to keep in mind that it's sort of this global variable. I can't change it, it's a const value, but I'm passing in from my CPU a value here that this takes on, okay? And then I'll be able to use that here and here in our vertex shader and our fragment shader. Okay, so now that we sort of have an understanding of that, then we need to understand, what location is this at, okay? So that I know where or what am I accessing in memory here, so that when I change it, that value is being changed in memory on our GPU, right? This is all GPU memory here, our vertex buffer object, just a chunk of data that we've copied over there, and our uniforms, okay? So that's the idea here. Okay, so I hope that gives some intuition. Let's actually do it in the program, and then I think that'll also help you just understand what's going on here. Now, super important here, so let me go ahead and open up our source here, that we make sure we name things 100% correct, okay? Because we're going to be using this function here, glGetUniformLocation, and it's going to return us a number. In fact, I'm going to print it out for you so you can go ahead and see what it is. So let's just go ahead and copy this here. I'm going to go down to our pre-draw routine, okay? And right after I use our shader, let's just go ahead and use this function here. And again, here's where I'm going to say exactly the spelling u_offset. And again, all this function's doing is it's looking inside of our shader code and saying, where's that symbol? Here it is. And then we'll figure out where the location is. Maybe it's, well, it looks like 0 and 1 are taken up here, but here it is. Okay, and let's go ahead and specify which graphics program object are we doing. Well, that's our graphics pipeline that we just set up here. Oops, ggraphics pipeline shader program. And then this is a location here. So it is just a GL int here. I'm just going to call it location and set it equal here. And let's just go ahead and print out the location of u offset. Okay, so it's just going to be some integer. This is just some sort of handle into memory saying, hey, at this location, somewhere on our graphics chip in memory in this table, we have this location. And that's a cheaper thing to do, just have an integer lookup versus actually doing a string lookup, if you're wondering why we do this. So u_offset, and let's just go ahead and do a print line. And since we're modifying our CPU code, I need to compile this. Oops, and this is going to be location. Sorry, what I'm printing out here. That's the location in our memory. And let's go ahead and run this. And you could go ahead and see that this location here is 0. Okay, it's the first one here. So it's different than our vertex buffer object, which has location 0. You might notice this and say, hey, this is confusing here. But again, this is what's being taken in. That's how we know it's from my vertex buffer, because we're reading this in here, okay? So let me go ahead and just show you a few things here. So, let's go ahead and see, the first thing that I like to do here is just maybe even a little bit of error checking. Say if location is greater than or equal to 0, then we'll go ahead and just print this off and say we found it. And this is how you can do a little bit of error checking. Otherwise, you'll say, could not find u_offset, maybe a misspelling. Okay, something like that. Okay, so let me just demonstrate a common error that folks will have. So I'll compile it. Again, works fine. Here's our program. And again, let's try to query this time for something, even if I just misspelt like by a little bit. So maybe capital U here. So compile is fine, and I run it. And now you're going to see, hey, can't find that actual thing, right? It's not in our shader. It's u_capital O lowercase offset. Okay, so super important for folks to understand that. Okay, so let me undo that change here so we actually find our variable, and now we actually want to set it to some sort of value here. Okay, so how do I set the value? Well, if I found it, okay, so I'll get rid of this here, but I'll leave in our error checking just in case here. Now what do I want to do here? Well, again, what I'm trying to do in this program here, let me go ahead and show you up here, is just change the Y position here, okay? So what were we doing in our draw code here, or sorry, our input? So let me search for input right? We were updating the g_u offset. Okay, so we want to put this value into this in our shader program. Okay, so let's go ahead and just copy this here. Let me go back to where we were. All right, and I want to go ahead and now use from this family of functions here. Let me go to GL, not GetUniform, but just glUniform. glUniform here. And we're just working with one floating point value here. Okay, if we were working with 2 floats, like a vec2, we could use this, 3 floats, etc., etc. And there's lots of different iterations of these types of things that you have here. If I'm working with a 3 float, like a vec3, I might use this. Or if I'm working with an array, you have a count parameter, so you can specify if you have an array of things, how many are you actually working with. So there's different ways you can play around with a uniform and find examples. But for now, just one floating point value here that I need to set here. So actually, let me leave this open just so you can see as I'm typing it here, glUniform1f, the location that we found that variable, and then the value that we want to put in here, which is going to be u offset and a semicolon to terminate this. Okay, so now let's go ahead and compile this. Okay, and I have to recompile again because I'm changing my C++ code here. My shader code hasn't changed, but let's go ahead and run our program, and I've got it here. And now I'm just going to go ahead and hit up, and just like that, hit down. We can see our actual rectangle here, our quadrilateral, is moving. It should be a square, and we'll talk about that when we talk about perspective later, but that's kind of cool. So again, up and down, up and down. You can have all sorts of fun with this. And, hopefully this is evidence, again, that we are in fact setting a new offset here, back and forth, back and forth. All right. So with that said, that's what I want to achieve for this lesson. I'll go ahead and leave up our diagrams here again, just so you understand clearly. We've talked about vertex buffer objects in this series. Make sure you go check out those previous lessons if you're not comfortable with how we got this colored rectangle here. And then go ahead and make sure you understand this idea of a uniform being a global variable again. So, if you want to have a little bit of fun with this, and we should have a little bit of fun here on this series, let me go ahead and just do a v-split again here. And let's open up our fragment shader. Let's use that same offset for the actual color too. Maybe let's subtract from the red whatever the u_offset is. Okay. And since I just recompiled the shader, I don't need to recompile my program here. So let's go ahead and push this up here and up and down. And you can see that this is actually changing here as I move up. That corner is getting darker. So you can start to have some fun here when I make it negative again. And that's just to prove to you again that, this variable is shared amongst both shaders. So even if I got rid of G offset, so let's just go ahead and do that here. Let's get rid of it here in our shader. So I don't need to recompile. Now, oops, actually, it looks like since we're using it here, we do need to copy it here. So, so it is shared in terms of memory, but I do need to state here so the compiler doesn't complain that it is there. So even though I'm duplicating these, it's the same location and all that sort of stuff here. Okay, so hopefully we get the idea there, I guess, and get things taken care of there. All right, so go ahead and end the lesson there. Again, what we did in this code here, we added a uniform to our fragment shader. We added that uniform into our vertex shader so that we could access it. And then we queried for that location in our specific graphics program using getUniformLocation. And then we picked a glUniform function that allowed us to modify one floating value, which is exactly what we have on the shader. Again, the same type here. And then we added just a little bit of interaction here in our input here to change the actual global variable here for the offset. All right, folks, so that was a bit of a monster lesson, but I hope it'll help you understand all the pieces that are needed to add in things in a uniform. And there's lots of different tricks that you can do too as well to improve your code. For instance, I'm querying for the location of the uniform every frame. You could actually cache that. You really only need to look it up once, and then as you're changing things, then you're good to go here. And then you can also add different sort of querying mechanisms, for example, to list out all the uniforms in your shader, which is a nice way to detect, for instance, if you misspelled something, for instance, in our error handling code, to just print everything out. I think that's a nice idea that you could do. But maybe those will be things in future lessons. If you want to see those types of videos, please comment below. Give this a like if you enjoyed this video. If it's the one that finally helped you understand uniforms, your support is appreciated. A big shout out to those of you who've joined as members and have been following this series. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing. And with that said, thank you for your time and attention. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.